Enterprise Bank. On behalf of the Enterprise Bank team, we welcome you to our nonprofit collaborative seminar focused on safeguarding your nonprofit organization. This is certainly a timely topic, as I just experienced fraud over this past weekend. We thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. Since 2008, our nonprofit collaborative has offered educational seminars presented by industry experts on a variety of topics. We listen to attendee feedback for topic ideas and aim to host seminars that are of interest to the nonprofit leaders, staff, board members, and volunteers in our community. Supporting our communities has always been an integral part of who we are at Enterprise Bank. We have 27 full-service branch locations in Massachusetts and Southern New Hampshire. As always, Enterprise Bank is available to assist you with any and all your banking needs. Please note a recording of today's seminar will be available alongside the slide presentation and uploaded to Enterprise Bank's website by the end of this week. We will notify you by email when the material is uploaded to our website. At the end of today's session, we will leave time for you to ask questions. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce my colleagues for this morning's panel. Collectively, they have over 70 years of banking experience. These enterprise bankers are valued and respected for their knowledge, expertise, and passion. Today's panel discussion will include the following enterprise bankers: Meaghan Lally-McGurl, our Chief Risk Officer, Executive Vice President. During the past 17 years, Meaghan has held positions overseeing operational risk areas, including third-party risk management, business continuity, pandemic planning, internal controls, and information security. We have Edith Joyce, our Cash Management Director, Senior Vice President, with us today as well. Edith is responsible for the bank's commercial cash management program and focuses on overall relationship management and cash management. And finally, is Chris Diaz, Senior Cash Management Advisor, Senior Vice President. Chris is responsible for overseeing a portfolio of cash management clients and developing new cash management relationships in the Greater Lowell and Greater Essex area. They are passionate about sharing information to protect others and help mitigate fraud. Without further ado, please welcome Meaghan, Edie, and Chris.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. We are so thankful you're here. We know how hard each of you works as a nonprofit, whether raising funds, searching for donors, and fraud is just something that you really don't want to experience. So our goal today is to help provide some tips and things that we've learned over the 70 years Allison mentioned, and really from the conferences we attend, working with law enforcement, and unfortunately working with some of our customers. We'll share the experiences and the lessons learned to help you prevent and unfortunately most likely detect and recover from fraud. Before we get in, we do have one disclaimer that we do need to put up there. It's another housekeeping item, and that really just says that we are not here to give you specific legal, accounting, or technology advice. We will cover topics, as I discussed, of common themes and things our customers have experienced, but we cannot recommend specific technology or practices. We'll give you general ones that you can consider, but still please reach out to your legal teams, technology, and accounting teams to make sure what you're doing is in accordance with their expectations. So as I mentioned, our agenda today is really to help you. That's what we're here for. Our goal is to share some unfortunately scary fraud statistics. Then we'll talk about ways you can prevent fraud. And while we always hope that you don't have fraud, we follow the saying that it's not a matter of if, but when. So we'll also talk about detecting and recovering from fraud. As Allison shared, this webinar will be recorded and is recorded right now. And we encourage you to submit questions through the chat, and we'll get those at the end. Our first slide is a scary statistic. The FBI created the Internet Crime Complaint Center for individuals and companies to report crime. In 2023, you can see the staggering amount that there was $12.5 billion reported to them in losses. And the slide here shows the numbers over the past 5 years. Unfortunately, they haven't gone down. They've only increased. and we expect to see that in their 2024 report. If you would like more information on the stats, please go to ic3.gov. One other chart we wanted to share is really how are these scams coming about? Where is that 12 billion losses coming from? There's no surprise to us that the number one area that they see fraud coming from and where customers and individuals are losing funds, it's in phishing emails. Email is a great communication tool. We use it all the time without even thinking about it now. But really, phishing is scary. And it's one where we have to remember that emails are not always the truth. They are, again, a communication tool, but that's it. We have to verify what's in them. So phishing is a form that a bad actor uses to send an email to someone to try to get them to do something they shouldn't. It could be asking them to click on a link, which would then download malware. It might be to click on an attachment, also downloading malware, or it could be just to give you information. You might be giving up your credentials. Maybe you send your username or your password through a phishing email. They always play on some type of sense of urgency, or they try and make you feel guilty over something, or they just say, hey, you've won money, click here. And who doesn't want to click on those things because you think, hey, I've won something, let me go see what it is. Unfortunately, what you've done is you may have given the bad actor an opening to your system. You may have given them access to the files on your system. They could take control over it, or they could just be gathering information. It's hard to say, but phishing is one of the number one ways that bad actors are able to steal funds and compromise information. And emails are one way of this type of social engineering. There's actually a few others that are very similar. So vishing is through the phone, smishing is through text, and now the new term quishing is through QR codes. QR codes became very popular during COVID, and they're super helpful. Everyone likes to use them. It's a quick way to say, oh, let me click here and I can get more information. So if a nonprofit wants to start using a QR code to say, hey, if you click here, you can donate, that's great. But remember, you have to make sure those are secure. If you put those out there for donors to click on, and they do that and they later have fraud, that would be a huge reputation risk to a nonprofit. So these are all things, they're all great tools. Phone calls, text, emails, QR codes, they're all good technology. It's in how you use them. And we'll talk about some of the technical controls in a little bit. The second one here that we'll mention is personal data breach. At this point, based on the incidents of 2023, most individuals have received a letter at some time saying their information has been compromised. And while that's a tough situation to be in the moment, what's happening behind the scenes is there are certain, I want to say, bad actor companies that actually make their money off of gathering all this data, and they're putting it together, and then they can resell your information. And they can be used for a number of things, but one thing could be, as a nonprofit, maybe your executive director, their information was compromised 10 years ago, and maybe it was just their name and email, but then last year it was their social, and the year before that it was their date of birth. Now they might have all the information about your executive director, and they can pose as that person asking for donations. And really, it doesn't end up going to your nonprofit, it goes to the bad actor. So while individual compromises may not seem like a big deal to a nonprofit, it actually could still impact you. So that's how we mention it. We won't go through the other ones because we're actually going to talk about that in some examples coming up. And I admit I focus mostly on electronic fraud, but check fraud is still happening and it's rampant. So this is a survey that was done by NASDAQ, their Global Financial Crime Report. And they reported just last year, there was $21 billion in check fraud. And nonprofits, sometimes based on the resources you have or the availability of, team members or your employees, you might still be using checks because it's easier. It's easier to request them, to write them, but sometimes people use them also because they think, hey, if I don't use electronic transactions, I won't have fraud. But really, in this case, check fraud is just as bad. And unfortunately, we all have to make payments, so it's really coming down to what the controls you put in place. Checks alone are not bad, just like emails, phone calls, texting, and QR codes. They aren't bad inherently. It's just they're easy tools for bad actors to use to carry out fraud. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is really some of the controls you can put in place to be able to use these tools without having a loss for your nonprofit. So up first, we're going to have Chris and Edie talk about two examples. We have vendor payment fraud and counterfeit checks. Chris?
Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a great morning so far. And again, some of the fraud incidents we're going to go over, we don't intend to scare you, but we want you to be aware of what's going on. And if it does scare you and you want to chat more about it, we'd love to do so. But I'm going to go over vendor payment fraud. A lot of the vendor payment fraud that we're seeing nowadays are coming from fraudulent invoicing. And a lot of that fraudulent invoicing is coming via email. And again, it doesn't matter the size of the organization, not-for-profit, for-profit, municipalities, the large companies to small companies. It really doesn't matter. These fraudsters are really looking for anyone that's willing to make the payment off of a fraudulent invoice. And how it is, typically they're recreating invoices that you've gotten from prior vendors in emails in the past, because somehow they've either been watching via your system, as your system may be compromised, or the vendor's system may be compromised. So these emails are coming in saying, hey, we've updated our payment information. Could you please start making the payments to the bank A? And here's the new account number. And, we know that all organizations are busy. And again, email is a great tool, but it is also a way to potentially have fraudulent losses due to these invoices. So, one thing that I typically always recommend is making that additional phone call just to verify any change of payment information. It may be a little bit time consuming, but it's better safe than sorry. Again, these could be just emails saying, hey, even internally, I've changed my account. Could you please adjust my direct deposit? That's another type of, vendor payment fraud that we've seen. And again, some are the last minute, hey, we really need this wire now. Here's our information for the service that we provided you. And again, if they're being pushy and trying to get the payment right away, that's kind of a red flag. So, again, question any type of email that you receive with any change of invoice, anything like that. What we'll do next is we'll go over the counterfeit checks part. Edie, I'll have you take that away.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. I just wanted to underscore a couple things that Meaghan said. First of all, she mentioned that there's 70 years of experience today, and I've been in banking 40 years, so I think I skew that number a bit. And I wanted to share that we have seen all kinds of counterfeit check fraud for decades, many decades. Experts have been predicting that checks will essentially disappear as a payment method in the United States and replaced by electronic methods. So while check volume has decreased at about 8% over the past 5 years, according to the Federal Reserve, checks continue to be the most prevalent form of payment and are certainly the most susceptible to fraud. Fraudsters are very savvy, and they're constantly devising ways to outsmart victims like us. Physical checks are vulnerable for many reasons, and I'll go over some of them. Think about the journey a check takes from the creation of the physical check in your accounts payable areas to being deposited into a bank account. This means that many sets of eyes see your banking information and many sets of hands touch the checks along the way. There are endless opportunities for fraudsters to use your checking account information to successfully reroute your funds. Checks are stolen from mailboxes. We used to think those big blue mailboxes outside of post offices were a safe place to put your envelopes and your payments to your vendors, but that's no longer true. So those large blue mailboxes outside of the post offices, well, post offices have done a lot to try and curtail the phishing of envelopes out of post office boxes, it still happens. And it happens from mailboxes outside of residences and businesses. The fraudsters steal the checks, they alter the payee information and dollar amount, and then deposit checks through mobile deposit right into fraudsters' accounts. We're also seeing fraudsters try to negotiate altered checks at the teller line using stolen or fake identities, which Meaghan mentioned. And oftentimes, very organized fraud rings are behind these attempts. Check information can be easily taken and used to create counterfeit checks or ACH debits. The fraudster needs only the check serial number, bank routing information to create a counterfeit check or ACH debit or credit transaction from your account. I wanted to mention ACH credits. So a lot of us are receiving electronic payments, a lot of businesses, nonprofits, and personally. Oftentimes, fraudsters will test an account with a small dollar ACH credit to ensure that the account they are going to steal from is viable, and then follow up with an ACH or electronic credit, and then with a significantly larger debit. So you need to be vigilant in reviewing both your ACH credit and debit activity in your accounts and immediately report any unauthorized activity to the bank. So later in the program, we'll talk about tools to prevent these types of fraudulent activity. And now we're going to talk about business email compromise.
Thanks, Edie. Business email compromise, while Chris talked about it, I'm going to reinforce this again, only because this is such a tough area. This is where email, again, is a tool. So it could be you receive an email from your executive director, and all of a sudden they say, hey, I'm out of the office. Can you please buy gift cards? I want to treat all of our employees to something because we've done a great job this month. Now, of course, that sounds amazing, but really, is it the executive director? Maybe that's something that they do all the time and it's expected. But in general, that should send some red flags of I'm out of the office. Can you do something? And as Chris said, please call back at a known good number. We have had customers where they receive that email and the person says, oh, I'm out of the office at a funeral. Can you please call my husband's phone number? Or I'm on vacation, I don't have access to my phone. Can you call this other number? And the answer always should be no. While there could be some legitimate reasons someone can't get to their main phone number, in general, that usually means there's a bad actor that compromised their email. And then they try and get you to send things. Gift cards are tough because once you give the gift card information, that money is gone. So unfortunately, we're here to scare you a little bit. We will make you feel better later with some of the controls we'll talk about and some of the bank products. But really, we're trying to show there's the different ways that bad actors can be creative and prompt you to do something you wouldn't normally do, but it seemed sort of okay at the moment and you did it. But if you had had time, if they didn't pressure you to do it right away, you would have said, that doesn't sound right. And that leads to our last example. This one I admit is a little confusing. So I'll try and explain it because I admit the first time I heard about it, I said, what are you talking about? That doesn't make sense, but it's actually quite creative. So we have had customers that come into our branch and they want to do a wire. Now, these individuals typically have not done a wire in the past. And what they do is they say it's for, $34,000 and I want to send it for this reason. And typically, if someone doesn't do something often, we do reach out to say, hey, where'd you get this information? What's going on? And they usually say, oh, it's to pay a friend back, buy a rental, some kind of reason. But we usually push more. And what we found out is the scam starts like this. And it might be similar to nonprofits because we don't always have great technology providers for nonprofits because, funds are limited. We have to use the resources available without spending too much. So you might receive an email that says, hey, you're Norton or you're Geek Squad. And again, these are just examples, nothing to do with the vendors, but they're the most common technology support vendors. So the bad actors use them. You receive an email saying, hey, your Norton antivirus is going to expire. We've renewed your membership. Now you sit back and say, wait a minute, I don't have Norton antivirus. That's weird. So you click on the link that says unsubscribe here, or you call the number on that invoice. And when you get to the bad actor, they say, oh, So sorry, you're right, you're not a customer. Let me refund you those funds. And typically the amount is $349. It can be any amount, so don't use that as the only indicator, but it could be, $349, and they say, okay, let me log into your system, take a look. They ask you to click on a link. Unknowingly, you are giving them full access to your computer. Then they say, okay, show me your bank account information so I can refund you the money. So you log in and you say, okay, here's my, account information, here's your online banking, all that good stuff. And you unknowingly, again, have given them access. You think they're just looking at the Norton stuff. They're not. They're looking at everything. And what they do is they transfer money from one of your accounts to another one of your accounts. So if you have the funds, what they do is they'll, instead of $349, as you've discussed, they transfer $34,900. And they say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that, but I need to get this money back. If I don't, I'm going to be fired. And they start talking to you and going and going and going until you say, oh my gosh, let me refund you the money. And they actually will go to a branch. Sometimes the bad actors stay on the phone in people's pockets, which again sounds crazy, but this is not a scam that only people who don't know what's going on. It happens to everyone. We have had people of all ages, all education backgrounds, all races. It doesn't matter. Everyone thinks they're too smart to fall for something until they do. So when they get to the bank, we always show them that the bad actor only transferred funds between their own accounts. The bad actor is trying to show you that you got money that was new, but it really wasn't. They never refunded you money. They never did anything. So if you send out that money, that wire of $34,000, you've lost $34,000. So again, I know that one's a little bit tricky. There's a few different parts, but the big takeaways are: one, don't give someone access to your computer. And two, if you're not sure of something or you don't say, hey, I didn't enter that lottery, why am I getting email that I won? Don't click on anything. Call a known good number. So truly, if it's Norton, you can go online and look at Norton, get their main number and speak to them directly. So again, all of these have different parts of it, but the main thing is to unfortunately take a second, which we don't always have, but take a moment and really think about the transactions you're doing before you do them. Because again, a nonprofit, you work so hard to raise money. You'd hate to see a large amount go out the door based on a scam. So next we're going to talk about how to prevent. So again, I know we talked about a lot of scary situations, but now we're going to show you some of the technical and the non-technical controls you can put in place to try to prevent fraud. Again, nothing is foolproof. There's always going to be something that happens, but these will help reduce your risk. And the first thing is very tough that most people do not want to hear, but multi-factor authentication is very important for your email and your network systems. And multi-factor authentication is a combination of something you know, something you have, and something you are. So these days, typical things that you would see from a multi-factor authentication on email and your network is you go to log into your computer, you have your username and your password, and then you get a prompt on your personal phone, or it could be a company or a nonprofit phone, but just a separate device from the one you're logging in from that may have a code or an app that you use. And that really shows that it's you, because if someone gets your username and password, which at this point, most of them have been cracked or they've been exposed in some type of data breach, if they have your information, they can log in. But it's very important to have that second authenticator to really say, yes, this is me. And what's tricky is now sometimes bad actors try and convince you over the phone to give up that code. Never give out the code. And if you get the code when you haven't logged in, immediately decline it, because that means a bad actor is trying to get in. So right now for nonprofits, if you don't have an in-house technology group, reach out to whoever you work with and make sure you have multi-factor authentication turned on. I bolded it, I underlined it. If I could make a whole slide on multi-factor authentication, I would. That's how important it is. There are a couple other important ones, but I would say that is one of the top ones today. If you could take that away as one of your key takeaways, that would be amazing. The next item is passwords and biometrics. No one likes passwords. We totally understand. Do you use an uppercase, a lowercase, a character? It's all confusing. It's important to make sure that you have one that is strong enough for your company based on your risk. And if you can use biometrics, sometimes people use thumbprints now to log into computers, Whatever makes sense for your company, again, review your options with your technology providers. We just always put a note there to not forget about passwords. They are something that we all have to have. They're not our favorite, but they are so important as one layer. It's, again, not foolproof, but one layer to stop the bad actor from just logging in. The next one are patches and upgrades. This is something that as a nonprofit may not be your focus. You know, you're focused on your mission, you're focused on your donors, you're trying to figure out how to raise more funds. Computers, they're just something that you use, but patches and upgrades are so important because if you don't update them, a bad actor can get in with almost no effort. You always want to make sure you're on the latest patches, doing upgrades to your systems. Again, reaching out to your technology providers is so important to make sure they're either managing it or you are. We commonly hear from nonprofits and even small businesses, they're like, oh, I think my IT person handles that. Well, you need to know for sure, because if they think you're doing it, no one's doing it. So you want to make sure. The next two are very similar: user access reviews and least privilege access. Again, nonprofit, you might have 2 people, 1 person working, or you might have a staff of 100. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that individuals have the access they need to the systems they do, but no more and no less. So sometimes nonprofits, they start small. You know, you have 2 people, so everyone has access to everything because you want to be able to help and do everything. But as you grow, you want to make sure that you're separating some of those duties so that, you know, a person in marketing doesn't have access to create a check, or they're not doing an accounting recon. So you want to make sure all of those are separate and locked down to what they have. And then you're doing a review. We would say maybe every 6 months at a minimum annually, looking at who has access to your systems. Nonprofits especially, you have a lot of people changing roles, maybe leaving nonprofits. You might have someone on your board who's a treasurer that worked with you for a year, but now they moved on to another nonprofit. You want to make sure you're looking at all of your systems and your bank accounts to make sure that whoever is on them is current and authorized to do what they're doing. The next one is a backup. So this is really, we didn't talk about ransomware too much so far, but really that's something that has continued to be on the rise, and nonprofits are just as susceptible to being a victim as other companies and even individuals. And that's where someone clicks on a link in a phishing email. The bad actor then encrypts all of your files so you can't get to them. And they try and get you to send Bitcoin or do something else to get the files back. Now, could you imagine if you went to your nonprofit one day and you couldn't get into any of your systems? You couldn't get access to your list of donors? Or let's say it's the night of a big fundraiser and you can't access anything? That would be such an operational challenge for you, but also a reputation risk. So you want to make sure you have backups to use in the event that happens. You could always load them into a new computer system and use them without worrying about the bad actor, paying the ransom, anything like that. Another tech thing to mention is end of life and end of support. Some technology, let's use Microsoft again, just as an example, and every year some of their technology is no longer supported by them, which means they're not sending out patches or doing upgrades for security purposes. And you're at risk if you continue to use an out of support or end of life solution. Then a bad actor, they kind of do scans of networks and they try to see who is using what software. And if you're using something that is end of life or end of support, you are #1 on their radar because it's just that easy to get in. I won't talk too much about firewalls and network configurations. I would just mention that you want to make sure your technology provider is working on this. Make sure you have maybe a third party review what your tech company did just to make sure everything you think is in place is in place. And the last one is to mask sensitive information. So as a nonprofit, you may be receiving debit card information, you could be storing credit card information, maybe socials if you have maybe you're working at a daycare or a school and you have to have date of births or socials for some of your students. Do your best to only gather the data you need, and if you do have sensitive information, mask it so that in the unfortunate event that someone gets access to it, they don't have all of their information. So while technical controls are very important, there are some non-technical controls that also can help you. And I'll turn that back to Chris and Edie.
For non-technical controls, there's a number of just sort of common sense methods to put in place. Financial account reconciliations we have listed first. So it's really important that you are reconciling all your accounts. What we do recommend, however, is that you access your online banking every day to ensure that all the transactions in your accounts are legitimate. So while it's great to do the month-end reconciliation when you receive the statement, and I do want to make a little advertisement for having electronic statements, and your statement information is also available in online banking. It's really essential that if you see any irregular activity that you report it to us immediately, because there are some deadlines in terms of reaching out to other banks to try and help recoup funds that might go missing from your account. We also recommend dual controls, both for wire transfers and ACH, which is automated clearinghouse transactions. So if you're sending out wires or ACH files, please make sure that there's more than one approver and that you have some controls that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then paper. We all love paper still. It's not going away, but files have a lot of information in them, and it's information that people either externally or internally can access and use for other purposes. And then for non-public information, you're collecting information regarding donors, employees, et cetera. Please make sure that you're minimizing the amount that you are collecting in order to safeguard that information from fraudsters that might access your system. So Chris is going to talk about positive pay and callbacks.
Yeah, and just to kind of go back a little for, the financial account reconciliation, reviewing it daily. I mean, we all have 5 minutes in the morning that we're having a cup of coffee or even at the end of the day. So only takes just a few minutes just to see what's going on in presentments. Because again, the earlier you know and the quicker you let us know, that gives us the capability to start the process and hope to prevent it from actually being presented, or even, gives us the chance to recoup those funds, a higher possibility at that point if we see it in presentments. And then when it comes to dual controls, for ACH and wire, you can really customize how you do things. For example, if you're processing ACHs rather than writing checks, you can do multiple controls where you can have an individual have a limit of, processing ACH any amount under 2,500, and above that you can have a second approver, and even an additional approver for some of those larger ones over 50,000, 100,000, whatever customized limits you want. And then again, the statements, there's a lot that receive statements and they just get shredded. So try to limit that, set yourself up for e-statements and limit anything being mailed in, because just like sending checks out through the mailbox, when you have your statement sitting in a mailbox, there's a possibility that somebody takes that right out of there. But to move on to positive pay, we're going to discuss a little bit later as well, but positive pay is a really great tool, and we provide it, a lot of financial institutions provide it for check and ACH controls. So check positive pay is basically any time that you have a file of checks that you're writing out. So let's say Thursdays is the day that you write out all your checks. You can actually upload a file into positive pay in real time that's connected directly to our core system. So we look at those checks, those check files brought in, and any check that's presented that's not on that approved list would actually get denied right at the teller line if someone were to walk into an enterprise bank branch. And if it gets deposited at another bank, you'd receive notification the morning after it's presented stating there's a check trying to go through the system that's not on your approved list. Would you like to deny it as fraud, or would you like to pay it because maybe it was a check that you missed in the file? For check positive pay looks at check number, the amount, and then the payee match looks at the payee as well for it to be identical. So really great tool. Some say, oh, I don't really write many checks out. you know, in this day and age, it really doesn't matter if you're writing out 5 checks or 1,000 checks. Obviously, if you're writing out 1,000 checks, it's a really great tool, but it's all about time too. Do you have the time to be reviewing the account daily? If not, Positive Pay is really there to help you on that, on kind of, you know, making sure any debits leaving the account are legitimate. And that's where we get the ACH Positive Pay. Very similar to Check Positive Pay, where it's reviewing any ACH debits and credits coming through your accounts. Mainly, you know, you're more nervous about debits because you don't want to lose funds, but we always suggest having it review your credits as well, because, you know, fraudsters will try to connect your account with a third-party service, and that's where you see those little penny deposits come in. So again, ACH Positive Pay, if you're reviewing debits and credits, will ping you on anything that's not on your approved vendor list. So for example, you have your utility as an approved vendor, you can really set it as, all right, the utility can debit my account up to $500, and then anything above that, I want to be notified. Or you just keep them off your approved list and you're notified every time that an ACH debit or credit comes through the account. Again, it just gives you that increased control on the account itself. And then last but not least, I know I spoke about this earlier, callbacks to known good numbers. I cannot stress this enough. That is where we see a lot of, again, the fraudulent invoicing that happens. A lot of losses that we see are due to not making that additional callback. I've had conversations with, you know, organizations that have received an email, Chris, can you, you know, we need to increase our wire limit because, you know, we really need to make this payment. They're really pushing it. And I'm there to question, do they really need it today? Where did you get the information? Why did they change bank accounts? Have you made that call back to an individual that you know at that organization? It is really, really a key piece in mitigating any type of invoicing fraud. Call back, call back, call back. You know, I always look at it as, I love talking to people. So, you know, just making that extra call to kind of say, hey, what's going on? Is this legitimate? Is this account information correct? It's always, you know, an extra 5 minutes it may be, but it's going to save you in the long run.
Thanks, Chris. And I can't help it. I'm going to just double down on it. Again, please make sure you call back at a known good number. We all know everyone's working so fast and you don't have a lot of time. We get it. But if you send out funds that aren't really going to where they're supposed to go, you could be out that money. So again, you're paying a vendor invoice. Honestly, you could pay the vendor where you think they were supposed to be paid. That money's gone. Now you still have to pay the actual vendor. So while it takes that 5 minutes and not everyone loves to talk, you know, to everyone all the time, and you don't have the time, it's so important. And again, a known good number. It can't be one they put in the email or one they text you on the side. None of those are options. So we'll jump through detecting and recovering from fraud, because we always say, even if, you know, you put all these controls in place, we're human. We make mistakes. Bad actors might be targeting you. There could be a number of reasons that could happen where you're going to be a victim of fraud to some extent. So on this slide, we have just a couple of things that might be a red flag, something that you want to look into. It does not mean that there's fraud. It's just something to consider when you're going through all of this. So the first two are almost ironic because they're the opposites. You know, if you have an employee that takes amazing vacations, they're going on cruises and maybe traveling the world, and unless they're independently wealthy, you might say, hey, that seems odd. But again, it may not be fraud. It might just be they have another side job, or they have some inheritance, whatever it might be, but it's something to consider. And then the opposite, if there's an employee that never takes a vacation, we would recommend looking into that as well, because that could mean they're trying to manipulate some of your controls. Maybe they want to make sure they're there to process everything so that nothing happens. And it seems like a really nice thing. They're so dedicated, but really they might be carrying out fraud. They might not be, but those are things to consider. And if you receive any phone calls or mail for people or businesses, clients, whatever it might be, that's not correct, that's another thing you want to follow up on, because maybe they're using your address for something, or they're using your information for something. It's hard to know. Another one is access logs. So if you have a security system, or even on your computers, there are logs of things that happen. So maybe someone is logging in every night at midnight. And you might say, hey, that's kind of weird. But again, maybe that's their schedule. Maybe they have something during the day they can't get to, so they log in at midnight. Maybe that's okay. But does it make sense for your organization? Think about it. I think Edie mentioned this before, is changes in direct deposit information. We do see that unfortunately quite often, where someone in the HR team receives an email saying, hey, I'd like to change my bank account. I just opened a new bank. And the HR person says, great, no problem. Let me do that for you. But they don't call back. And unfortunately, that team member or that employee's email was either compromised or spoofed or something happened. And again, anytime you're changing information like that, always call back. If you get an unexpected error message, I mean, we all do. We're human. We have user issues with computers and things like that. But sometimes it's a bigger issue. If you have an error message, report it to whoever you're supposed to report it to. Might be your IT firm, in-house IT, whoever it is, just report it. Worst case, they look at it and say, oh, you made a mistake, no big deal. Or they might say, oh my gosh, that means there's a bad actor in our network. We have to shut it down. It could be anything. We always recommend management's review of transactions, just like looking at your bank statements, your account reconciliations. Ideally, you have two people reviewing things. So maybe you have a rule or a policy that says any disbursements over $1,000 requires two people's signature. Or you say maybe for your organization, it makes sense to do 50,000. Whatever it might be, find that right balance where you can still do your jobs, but you're doing it within a good set of internal controls. And the next two are tied together. Vendor payment information. We've talked about this a lot, so I don't want to go too crazy, but when you set up new vendors, always look to see, does it make sense? What's their address? Do they have the right forms? Because unfortunately, it could be someone internally setting up a family member to get paid, or a company they're working with, who knows? And then again, changing vendor payment information. You just don't want to be caught paying a vendor. You think you're doing everything right, but then find out later their email was compromised. And the last one is recovering from fraud that we want to talk about. So the recovery depends on the situation. And it also depends on the type of company you are, as a nonprofit, but you could be in certain industries that have additional requirements. But for example, if you are in the state of Massachusetts, and if you have any non-public personal information, which could be a combination of someone's name and social security number, name and date of birth, there's a whole definition, but those are examples. If you have that information, you are required to have an information security program. And if any of that information is compromised, you do have to notify the Attorney General. And there's a whole website. If you go to the Attorney General's website, there's a form to fill out. And then depending on the information you have, it could be consumer affairs, could be law enforcement, could be some type of industry group. Unfortunately, there's just so many requirements now, which is why we said earlier, best case is don't collect any of this information. That would be ideal. But if you do and you have an issue, you do have to report it. We also recommend notifying your insurance agency, your banks, and your CPA firms, even your technology firms as well. Insurance companies can work with you to figure out if any of your policies currently apply. We'd also recommend reaching out to your insurance agency and kind of run through some of the scenarios we talked about today. And it would be interesting to see what they tell you you're covered for and what you're not. And again, banks, reach out as soon as you can. Any bank that you work with, it doesn't have to be us. We just want to make sure you are shutting down access so that you don't lose any funds. You may need to engage third parties. So it could be a forensic company, legal services, and then all the remediation steps. And the biggest thing is to make sure you keep documentation. You will be asked many, many times for the information. So we've covered how to prevent, detect, and recover from fraud, but now we're going to have Edie and Chris talk a little bit more about the products offered by the bank that can help you with some of these efforts. Chris and Edie?
Thank you, Meaghan. We have a number of products and tools to help mitigate fraud, and we do encourage that everyone have a conversation with their banker, either members of our team or with your contact at the bank, your account representative, to do a review of all of the best practice and the tools that are in place. So we mentioned online banking. So we want to make sure that you all have access to online banking and that you're looking at your account activity on a daily basis. As we mentioned, looking at your account activity after the statements arrive at the end of the month can oftentimes be too late to help recoup any losses. So we want to know immediately if you see anything irregular in your online banking activity. We talk about reducing paper-based payments, so converting check payments to electronic, and there's a number of ways to do that. In terms of implementing check positive pay, including pay positive pay and ACH positive pay, Chris mentioned that there's a lot of aspects of these products that can be implemented to help you offset any potential for fraud. And then we want to encourage you, if you have a high volume of checks that you're receiving in your offices, that you look at outsourcing that whole accounts receivable function to a lockbox. It does help to eliminate checks sitting around in your offices or payment information coming into your offices. So completely outsourcing your accounts receivable collection process is definitely recommended. And Chris, would you like to talk about commercial card programs and the other control?
Of course. And again, just to add on to the lockbox piece, if you are receiving, checks, even if it's a small amount, if you're not able to get them to the bank immediately, please make sure that they're in a locked drawer. Because again, those are live checks. Or even if you're using a service such as our express deposit service, where you're able to deposit those checks via a scanner on your desk. Again, we ask that you have those in a locked drawer because again, live checks, if anyone gets into your office and picks those up, they may not take them from your desk, but they're able to review the information, see account numbers, names, you name it. So always keep any of those checks in a locked drawer until you're able to get them to the bank or get them through express deposit. But to continue, eliminate use of personal credit cards and implement commercial card program. And I'm also going to toss debit cards on there because there's a lot of organizations that tend to want to have debit cards directly to the account. Try to limit that and try to reduce and completely eliminate it if possible. You can definitely look into a commercial card program. There's a program that we offer through our third-party Alon Financial Services called the Community Card, which is focused on nonprofits and having that commercial card program. Just, it's not directly connected to your bank account. That's a key piece. That's why I don't like debit cards for organizations. And then, you're able to review what's going on through those credit cards rather than the use of personal credit cards. Because again, you're not able to keep an eye and maintain, what's going on and what was the actual costs and, limiting that. So definitely look into a commercial card program. Enforce dual control, as I said earlier, for the ACH and wires, whether it's dual control for those, adding another approver above a certain amount, definitely, look into that. And I know a lot of banks don't really go by it, but even on the checks, I do still see, anything over 2,500, 2 signatures required. Again, that's something that banks don't enforce special endorsement security such as that, but it's also good to have internally. So definitely something if you want to continue to do. And then segregate duties and accounts. Sometimes you may not have enough staff to be able to do so, but if you do, limit AR and AP to different departments or different individuals, but also still have a second set of eyes on both the receivables and the payables side. And again, dual control. And then last but not least, do not accept or pay in cash. That can be tough at times, but cash is, everyone used to say cash is king, but I don't like cash. It can, whether it's stolen, if you have it in a drawer or in a little lockbox, whatever you have, it's just an easy payment method to, lose and not keep track of what's actually being, brought into the organization. Edie, do you want to add to any of those?
No, you did a great job with the overview, and I know that we want to save time for questions, so I will just quickly mention that we have a number of resources. You'll get a copy of this information. We have other resources in addition to that, so please reach out to us if you want additional information to what we have listed on this page. And I think now we might open it to questions.
So if anybody has any questions for the panelists, feel free to put your question here in the chat box and I will moderate the Q&A. We did have 3 questions come in during the seminar, so we'll start with those. So it gives you some time to put your thoughts together. So the first question we were asked was, my staff have received fake emails from me. How should they respond? Should they ignore, spam report, delete, reply no?
Oh, it's a great question. Email is so tough. So it's hard to know. There's a difference between your email being compromised, which is when someone actually has access to your email, and the difference with spoofed, where someone is pretending to be you. So what we always recommend is to, if you're not sure who it is, or if it doesn't look right, you call the person, as we've talked about a few times. But from whether you unsubscribe or, report them or do something like that, it's really up to you. Typically we just say delete and report, because you do want to know if your email has been compromised or spoofed. But sometimes if it was truly your email and you report that as, spam, then your domain, so let's say it was nonprofit.com, your domain could be blocked from sending email for a certain period of time based on the industry. So you want to be careful with some of those actions. It doesn't hurt to report it. I would talk to your IT person to see what they recommend, but it is very important at a minimum to delete and report to the person that, hey, I got your email, it doesn't look right, and again, reporting by calling.
Okay, the next question, it was recommended by a professional to create a standard 13-digit password template that has certain fixed numbers and symbols with 3 unique letters in the center as a way to remember your passwords. They say this technique is also very secure. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, we love to talk about passwords. And Chris and Edie, feel free to jump in here. I'll give my, 2 cents. Passwords are tough. You want to have a different one for every system. So already you have, if you wrote down how many systems you log into every day, I think you'd be surprised. And please don't write them down, by the way. But if you could use some type of password manager where you include the information and that's secure. But I will say, have password managers been compromised? They have. So unfortunately, I can't give you a direct answer. I will say creating passwords is really a risk analysis on yourself. The best thing to do is don't use a password alone. You want to have that multi-factor authentication tied to it. So every time you log in, I know it's not fun, but every time you enter your password, you should be prompted for a second authentication to verify that. It's tough, but it's worth it, because all passwords, there are a lot of vendors that do some research to say how quickly can you hack a password. And if you Google that, you're going to be sad. But typically, even a 16-digit character password can be hacked within a few hours. So really, do your best. Don't make it so complicated that you have to write it down, because that's a problem. But do your best to use some type of tool and then always put the authenticator app with it. Chris and Edie, you've obviously worked at the bank for many years and gone through our evolutions of passwords. Anything you want to add related to passwords?
Yeah, I've been to several seminars about, fraud as well, and heard from different individuals from, the cyber team for the state of Mass, you name it. And I always try to steer away from passwords. I like to do passphrases, because a password can typically, if you're not doing a crazy just character, number, letter, using one of those password tools, sometimes a password you think that nobody knows, oh, nobody knows my dog's name from 20 years ago. That's information that can be found. So, using a passphrase rather than a password, I typically would recommend. And then again, multi-factor authentication. It can be a pain, but it is definitely something that I highly suggest. And if you are using some kind of multi-factor authentication, having that multi-factor authentication being sent to your phone rather than email, I like that better, because again, if your email is compromised and you're using multi-factor authentication, and you're receiving that, verification code via email, they're able to see that. So, if you're able to get that to a mobile device, definitely highly recommend doing that instead of email as well.
Right. Let's see. If you share a stock transfer fund donation form online, what information is too sensitive to share? Is the financial company's identification numbers public? And is that all you need to have them call you about your account? Or is all you need to have them call you about your account number?
That is a very specific question. What I will share is when filling out any form, really take a step back to see what do they need. And ideally, if you're filling out a stock form, you're logging into your transfer company's website directly with your username, password, and authenticator. And then you enter the information in a secure portal. Again, anything can be compromised, but it's really, what do they need to process your account? Because I will say, as a bank, we do have to ask for certain information. And a stock transfer company will need to do the same thing. So provide what you have to, don't provide what you don't, and really just kind of know about it and always be ready, because we always say it's not a matter of if, but when. Assume you'll be a victim. So maybe look into your credit reports. You can download a free credit report throughout the year. If you go to freecreditreports.com, then you can look up certain things to see what's available to you. So you can always monitor your personal information just in case something should happen.
Next, wondering about unsubscribing from emails that pop up. I don't remember hearing if you mentioned this. Can this be an issue if you get an email from someone unfamiliar and you try to unsubscribe by clicking open the unsubscribe link?
Another tricky question. I would say typically I don't unsubscribe just in case for that one-off chance that it could be a bad link. But again, this is my personal opinion. I would recommend talking to your IT company. Another option you could do is to set up a rule in your email to automatically send these to delete. That way you're not, seeing them in your email, you're not clicking on anything, but you're also not, seeing them all the time and maybe engaging with them. Chris or Edie, anything you want to share on unsubscribe? Because we all receive so many emails. That's just been my approach, is to set up a rule, but everyone has kind of their own personal preference.
Yeah, I'm the same way, Meaghan, on setting up that rule. The easiest way to go about it.
Great.
All right. We've been cautioned by our accounting team for letting too many people use the company credit card, but it seems like you're suggesting that we lean towards company credit cards instead of people using personal cards and requesting reimbursement. Do you have suggestion on how to balance these competing thoughts?
Chris or Edie, do you want to take this one?
We would love to talk to you individually about different programs that you can use so that your employees are not using personal credit cards. We definitely would be able to help you tailor a program that best meets the needs. And we know that, there are programs where multiple employees have to make purchases on behalf of their programs or their group homes for their consumers, et cetera. So please get in touch with Chris and me, and we can help you maneuver that question. But we definitely would support you on not letting your employees use personal credit cards.
Yeah, and just to add, how do you balance that? Really kind of just sitting down and understanding what are the needs and who actually needs a card. Because at times I've worked with organizations that say, oh, we need 25 cards. Do you really need 25 cards? And that's kind of where you need to kind of look at it and say, all right, who should really be doing the purchasing for any items using the company credit card? Or if you do need to have them out to multiple individuals, who are the actual individuals that are using the card? Because you may have some out there that they have the card for just in case, but they've never used it. It may be a few years since they've used it. Kind of just looking back at, again, the actual needs and who actually needs it. But
Chris,
definitely happy to chat about that.
Yeah, you just underscored my point from earlier. I appreciate it. That's the user access reviews that no one also likes to do, but it's perfect. You may have issued someone a credit card 10 years ago, but they've never used it and you really want to look at, or someone's left. But again, if you do the personal route, you can do policies and procedures that cover it. So it's not an enterprise bank said do anything, but definitely reach out to Chris and Edie with, their thoughts to help you maneuver that situation.
So we do have a few more questions, which we're going to get to. It is 9:30, so I'm going to invite Chet on, who's going to take care of our closing remarks. Our presenters are going to stay on for a few more minutes to finish up the questions, but to be respectful of everyone's time, Chet is going to formally close out the program. But do stay on if you'd like to continue with the Q&A.
Right. Well, thank you, Courtney. And I'm Chet Zablak. I'm Executive Vice President here in Enterprise Bank. And I'd like to thank our audience for being here this morning. We appreciate you spending the time to be here with us. I'd also like to thank our presenters, Meaghan, Edie, and Chris, for their presentations this morning. And at Enterprise Bank, we're so fortunate to have them as part of our team and with the expertise that they have to provide to our clients. As mentioned, through our cash management area, we do have a number of tools that can help to detect and prevent fraud. And we encourage you to reach out to Edie or Chris after this if you have any additional needs or questions regarding fraud and how to prevent it. I'd also like to thank Courtney Ratty and Allison Burns, my colleagues here who put together a nonprofit collaborative and who did a wonderful job putting this morning's presentation together. We have another nonprofit collaborative presentation this spring, and that'll occur on Thursday, May 30th. The subject is building healthy, equitable organizations through succession planning. It's a morning seminar similar to this on Zoom. That'll start at 8:30 and end at 9:45. And with this one, we actually have two outside presenters. We have Molly Penn and Marissa Lewis, who are from the Penn Creative Strategy Group. So hopefully you can join us on May 30th for that presentation. In the meantime, though, again, thank you for being here this morning. Thank you to our presenters, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Chet. All right, I'm going to continue on with a few questions that we still have. This one is, how often do you suggest changing passwords?
Oh man, this answer is also, it depends. I hate to say it. So it depends on if you do have another authenticator option. It will depend on how long your passwords are. There are some, again, using biometrics is ideal. And then you're not even using passwords or changing them. So it comes down to your environment. That's why we can't say, it's best case to do X. We really can't say that. It's really working with your IT provider to say, hey, here's our environment. What is the best case scenario for us to use so that we are not inconveniencing our employees to the point where they're writing everything down? Because security is always a balance. You want to make sure that you are providing security controls that people can work within. The worst case is to put in this amazing but crazy long password requirement, and then all of your employees say, well, I can't do that. They write it down and they stick it under their keyboard so anyone can use it. So just keep that in mind. There's no perfect answer. Consider all the factors of using a multi-factor authenticator app, text, email, maybe using biometrics, doing something so that it's not just the password.
Yeah, and just that, I believe it was brought up earlier, just making sure that it's not the same password for every system that you have. So if you have multiple systems within your device that has passwords, don't use the same password, change it up for each one of them. And again, really up to you to understand, when you feel that you need to do changing a password, whether it's quarterly, monthly, every 2 months, you name it. It's really up to you and the organization and how you kind of look at risk.
Right. And MFA is tough because not every company or system offers it. Some will do text, some will do email, some will do an authenticator app, some will call you. So it really depends on the vendor and the system. When you're evaluating new systems for that, make sure you, again, talk to your IT provider, because there could be other things behind the scenes where they might use what we call cookies to track where you are. So that is one of the factors of knowing what you have, or something you have, something you are, and something you know. So again, it could be password and your device, could be password and your fingerprint. There could be a combination. So while I admit I focus on authenticator apps, because that is currently one of the most secure ways, not the only secure way, and it's not foolproof because people are breaking it every day. There are still other controls that you can put in place to really cover and make sure that you're getting that second review or second chance to kind of look at something, so you're not just logging in with only a username and password.
Let's see, we have, what is the desktop deposit scanner you mentioned?
Oh, yes, that's our express deposit service. So it's an actual scanner that we can set up that will be directly connected to whichever account you make your deposits into. And you're able to scan in the checks rather than going to the branch to deposit those checks. And just like walking into the branch, as long as you're making that deposit within normal banking hours, it's available next business day. Again, there's an agreement attached to it. Definitely something that I'd be happy to discuss with you further. Again, my email and my direct line is on that questions page. So please feel free to reach out to me, and happy to set some time to discuss it with you.
Thank you. All right, I think this might be the last question. How do you feel about using online payment with vendors using our account number and routing number?
Chris or Edie, do you want to take that one?
Edie, do you want to take this one, or would you like me to opine?
Why don't you start opining? I'm not sure if Christine's asking about using a third party or a fintech to help with her.
What I'll do, Christine, is I'll kind of go over how do you feel about using online payments with vendors. So if the vendor has a in their system allowing you to put in your account information to make that payment, is my assumption of what this question is. Again, risk assessment wise, right? Knowing who the vendor is, if it's a utility company, anything like that, that's something that we all use, right? So much more comfortable. But again, organizations can have breaches, similar to, the breaches that we hear with, the merchant services on Home Depot or some of those large organizations in the past that card information that was stolen. The possibility of those organizations being breached and your account information may be taken in that breach is there. So if you can send an ACH and you be the originator using, Enterprise's ACH or another financial institution, that's typically what I recommend. But if it's a large organization that you're comfortable with, that you've been working with, providing your information to them is great as well. And another way that you can kind of take the nerves out of it all is implementing ACH positive pay. So granted you're giving them your account information, you would still have to put them on your approved vendor list on ACH positive pay, or don't put them on the vendor list and you get notified anytime they debit your account. So that's kind of a way to kind of set up just an additional tool to prevent any ACH debits that you don't want leaving the account, and that you're offering your account information to these outside party vendors. So definitely something that I would look into.
Yep. And Chris, you kind of opened the door for me. I know we've given everyone a lot to think about today, but I'll just give a plug for third-party risk management. You might call it vendor management, but knowing the vendors you work with, looking at their security controls, because, even if they have an issue, it could be your issue as well, because you're working with them, you're engaging them. It's your responsibility to really know what they're doing. And it's so important. It's so hard these days. Everyone has challenges, but really making sure you know the vendors you work with. And it also was a great reminder, Chris, about, positive pay, because it's probably, an if but when type situation. Again, your account information's out there, whether you do a check, whether you've given it out over the phone, whatever it might be, you definitely want to have the ACH checks on there just to make sure.
And I think there was actually one question I missed. If our bank has not yet set up MFA, should we ask when it's coming or consider moving to a different bank?
Well, this is always a tricky one since we're a bank and, we don't want to talk too much about specific banks or give advice. As we said earlier, MFA is a very important control. It's not the only one. It's one layer in the security realm that you should be enforcing. And if your bank doesn't have it, they probably have other controls in place. So you want to talk to them and really find out what's in place. You can go to their website. Most banks have a security page, or again, you can talk to your banker and really find out what they're doing. And you can ask them, what are the plans in the future? How is my information protected? All of those are great questions to ask, and make sure you're informed. And the one thing that I'll also mention ties to this question, the last one, is you want to know where your data is. Just make sure you have an idea of who has your information, and that includes your banks, your vendors, whoever it might be.
And just to add, again, you only know what you know. So I would always suggest setting up whether it's an annual or a semi-annual review with your banker, just to hear what's going on. They're able to educate you on what's going on in the world and what new products and services or security tools that may be on the roadmap or have been implemented in between the time that you last spoke with them. Definitely highly suggest having at least an annual, if not a semi-annual review with your banker.
And there is one final question. What is your opinion on the security of MFA based on SMS versus based on authenticators?
So that for everyone, so multi-factor authentication is having that second factor that we talked about. The factors are something you know, which could be your password, something you are, biometrics, or something you have like your device. So SMS is text message, and that is where a third party will text you a code to then enter into your app. The Authenticator app is an app you open on a smartphone where it has a tool that you either enter a number or it sends you a number. It might push a notification or you enter it. In general, typically we push for the Authenticator app, but SMS which is texting, or email or phone call, we'd rather that than nothing. So all options are on the table as long as there's some type of second verification of logging in and it's not just your username and your password. Chris or Edie, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, I think you did a great job there. Are there any?
All right.
I just wanted to ask if there were any other questions that people are still waiting to hear from us. We may have answered a portion of your question, but possibly not completely. Just want to make sure that Rebecca received a complete answer about the stock form. And I wanted to just kind of add something to that. I've seen some universities put forms out on their website in the Donate Now section that has their own stock transfer account, which I think is what she may have been referring to. And I've wondered whether that's a good idea to put that information out there. I know Meaghan responded about what to do if, there's any sort of questionable activity and related to that. But I would recommend that if anyone wants to make a stock transfer to any nonprofits, that they get in touch with the development area to do that and to get the stock transfer information directly rather than posting it out on your website.
And
Perfect.
again, if there are any other questions that you think of, all of our information is on that last page. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Happy to chat and answer any questions that you may come up with.
Yes, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to Chris and Edie. We know we gave you a lot to think about first thing in the morning. So please reach out with any questions if you want to go over anything in more detail. And as Allison and Courtney shared, the recording will be available as well as the slides. So we hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.